The man they fired as a janitor was the only person who could save a $50 million project, but nobody in that room knew it yet. The glass walls of Hayes Dynamics reflected the morning sun across polished floors and sleek workstations. Designers moved quickly between meetings. Engineers studied prototypes. Executives carried tablets and coffee cups as if every second mattered. In the middle of it all, Nathan Brooks pushed a cleaning cart quietly through the innovation wing. Most people barely noticed him. That was nothing new. Nathan had spent the last 6 years becoming invisible. His blue maintenance shirt was neatly pressed. His employee badge hung slightly crooked from years of use. At 42 years old, he looked like a man who had accepted a simple life. What nobody saw was the discipline in his eyes. What nobody knew was the story behind them. The company's largest client presentation was less than 48 hours away. The design team had spent months developing a revolutionary transportation component that promised to transform the future of urban mobility. Yet despite endless meetings and expensive consultants, a critical flaw remained buried inside the design. Every engineer who examined it reached the same dead end. Every executive grew more anxious. At exactly 8:17 a.m., Nathan entered conference room 7 to empty a recycling bin after an early strategy meeting. The room was empty. Large digital screens still displayed the project blueprint. Nathan glanced at the design only briefly. Then he stopped. His hand tightened slightly around the recycling bag. Something was wrong. He stepped closer. The room was silent except for the soft hum of ventilation and the distant click of heels in the hallway. Nathan studied the blueprint. 30 seconds passed. Then 60. His eyes moved across dimensions, material specifications, and structural calculations. Finally, he reached for the wireless stylus resting beside the screen. With calm precision, he adjusted 3 measurements. He modified a support angle. He changed a material transition point. Then he added a simple note beside the revision. The entire correction took less than 90 seconds. What exactly do you think you are doing? The voice cut through the room like cold steel. Nathan slowly turned around. Victoria Hayes stood in the doorway. The young CEO's tailored charcoal suit matched the sharpness of her expression. Behind her stood several senior designers and project managers. Every pair of eyes locked onto Nathan. The stylus remained in his hand. "I noticed a problem," Nathan said calmly. "I was trying to help." A few employees exchanged amused looks. One designer laughed under his breath. Victoria stepped forward. "You noticed a problem?" she repeated. "On a project developed by some of the best engineers in the country?" Nathan set the stylus down carefully. "The load distribution is creating unnecessary stress. It can be fixed." The room erupted with quiet chuckles. Victoria folded her arms. "You are a janitor." Nathan nodded once. "Today, yes." The answer only made the situation worse. Several people smirked openly now. Victoria's patience disappeared. "This company pays experts to work on these designs," she said. "Not maintenance staff." Nathan remained silent. The fluorescent lights reflected softly against the conference table. Outside the glass walls, employees had begun slowing down to watch. "You altered confidential project files without authorization," Victoria continued. "That is completely unacceptable." Nathan looked at the screen one final time. "The correction will help." Victoria shook her head. "No. What will help is respecting boundaries." The room grew still. "Nathan Brooks," she said firmly, "effective immediately, you are terminated." Silence followed. Nathan neither argued nor protested. He simply nodded. He removed his employee badge and placed it gently on the table. Then he picked up his cart. "I am sorry for causing trouble," he said quietly. As he walked toward the door, no one noticed the uneasy expression forming on the face of the company's oldest engineer. His eyes had just landed on the revised measurements. And for the first time in months, the impossible flaw at the heart of the project had completely disappeared. The conference room remained silent for several seconds after Nathan disappeared down the hallway. The automatic doors slid shut behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than anything Victoria had said. Then the room slowly came back to life. A few designers exchanged awkward smiles. Someone cleared his throat. Another person gathered presentation notes from the table. Victoria looked around the room. "All right," she said. "We have more important things to focus on." Heads nodded immediately. Nobody wanted to challenge the chief executive officer. Nobody wanted to be the next person standing on the wrong side of her disappointment. The team returned their attention to the giant display screen. The revised blueprint still glowed in the center of the room. Victoria pointed toward it. "Remove those unauthorized changes and let us continue." One of the senior engineers reached for his tablet. "Actually," he said carefully, "before we do that, I would like to review them." Victoria frowned. "Review what?" "The modifications." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The engineer enlarged the section Nathan had altered. The room grew quiet again. He stared at the measurements for several moments. Then he adjusted his glasses and leaned closer. "That is strange." Victoria folded her arms. "What is strange?" The engineer did not answer immediately. Instead, he called over another member of the development team. Within seconds, 2 engineers became 4. 4 became 7. Soon nearly everyone was gathered around the display. Victoria remained at the head of the table, her patience thinning. "Can someone explain what is happening?" she asked. Finally, one of the younger engineers spoke. "The stress imbalance is gone." Victoria blinked. "What?" "The structural stress problem," he repeated. "The one we have been trying to solve for months." Another engineer quickly opened a simulation model. Numbers scrolled across the screen. Digital graphs shifted. Calculations updated. The room watched in silence. 10 seconds later, the results appeared. No one spoke. The simulation had passed. A senior project manager leaned forward. "Run it again." They did. The result remained the same. Again. Another simulation. Another successful result. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The casual confidence that had filled the meeting only minutes earlier vanished. In its place came uncertainty, curiosity, concern. Victoria stepped toward the screen herself. "Are you saying those changes worked?" Nobody answered immediately. Finally, the lead engineer nodded slowly. "Yes." Victoria looked at him as if she had misheard. "You are telling me a janitor solved a problem that our design division could not solve?" The engineer hesitated. "I am telling you the problem appears to be solved." A faint murmur spread through the room. Victoria stared at the display. The bright lines of the blueprint seemed different now, more complete, more stable. Yet she refused to let herself accept the obvious conclusion. "It could be luck," she said. "Anyone can accidentally move a few dimensions." The oldest engineer in the room, Harold Bennett, remained unusually quiet. At 68 years old, he had spent 4 decades designing products for some of the largest companies in America. He rarely reacted emotionally to anything. But now his eyes remained fixed on the screen. Specifically, on a small handwritten note Nathan had left beside the revision. Harold moved closer. His expression slowly changed. Victoria noticed immediately. "Harold," she asked, "what is it?" The veteran engineer did not answer. He simply zoomed in on the note. The room followed his gaze. Beneath the revised measurements sat a short technical observation written in neat, precise handwriting. Most people saw only a few words. Harold saw something else. Recognition. His breathing slowed. "No," he whispered. "That cannot be." Victoria stepped forward. "What cannot be?" Harold looked up from the screen. For the first time since anyone in the company had known him, he appeared genuinely shaken. His eyes moved toward the conference room door through which Nathan had disappeared only minutes earlier. Then he spoke 6 words that instantly drained the color from several faces around the table. "I have seen this work before." The conference room felt smaller now. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for a laptop. Nobody checked a phone. Harold Bennett remained standing near the display, staring at the handwritten note as though he had just seen a ghost. Victoria watched him carefully. During her 8 years leading Hayes Dynamics, she had never seen the veteran engineer lose his composure. "Harold," she said again, "what are you talking about?" The older man took a slow breath. His eyes never left the screen. 20 years ago, he said quietly, there was a designer every company wanted to hire. A few employees exchanged curious looks. Harold continued. He solved problems other people could not even define. Entire development teams would spend months searching for answers. He would walk into a room and find the solution in an afternoon. The room grew silent. Victoria folded her arms. "And what does that have to do with this?" Harold pointed toward the handwritten note. "This." He enlarged the image further. The simple observation Nathan had written looked ordinary at first glance. But beneath it was a tiny mark. Not a signature. Not exactly. Just a small habit of notation used by engineers when documenting design logic. Harold recognized it instantly. Nobody wrote technical notes like Nathan Brooks. Several people frowned. The name meant nothing to them. One younger designer shook his head. Who is Nathan Brooks? Harold looked at him with disbelief. You have never heard of him? The young man shrugged. Harold gave a quiet laugh. It was not amusement. It was astonishment. That is what happens when legends disappear long enough. Victoria stepped closer. Are you telling me our janitor is the same Nathan Brooks? Harold finally turned toward her. If he is not, then somebody has spent years perfectly imitating one of the greatest design minds I have ever known. The words landed heavily. Victoria felt a strange sensation in her stomach. Not guilt. Not yet. Something closer to uncertainty. Across the room, engineers began searching company archives and industry databases. Fingers moved rapidly across keyboards. Screens illuminated with old articles and forgotten photographs. Then one employee froze. I found something. Everyone gathered around his monitor. An article from nearly 2 decades earlier filled the screen. The headline described a revolutionary transportation system that had transformed manufacturing efficiency across the country. Beneath the headline was a photograph. A younger man stood beside a prototype vehicle. He wore a suit instead of a maintenance uniform. His smile was confident. His eyes were unmistakable. Nathan Brooks. The room went completely silent. Another article appeared. Then another. Patent registrations. Industry awards. Conference presentations. National innovation rankings. The deeper they searched, the more astonishing the picture became. Nathan Brooks had not simply been talented. He had been famous within the engineering world. This cannot be real, whispered one project manager. Why would someone like that clean office floors? Nobody had an answer. Victoria stared at the photograph. The man in the image looked nothing like the quiet janitor she had fired less than 30 minutes earlier. Yet it was undeniably him. She remembered his calm expression, his steady voice, his refusal to argue. Most people would have defended themselves. Most people would have begged to keep their job. Nathan had done neither. Harold slowly sat down. I met him once, he said. Every head turned toward him. At an engineering summit in Chicago. I was already respected in the industry. He was barely 30. By the end of the conference, everyone was talking about him instead of the keynote speakers. The room listened carefully. He had a gift, Harold continued. Not for designing products. Plenty of people can do that. His gift was seeing what everyone else missed. Victoria looked back toward the conference room door. Nathan had stood there only minutes ago. Quiet, respectful, certain. Suddenly his final words echoed in her mind. The correction will help. She had dismissed them immediately. Now those words sounded very different. Around the room, employees continued uncovering pieces of Nathan's past. Yet with every answer they found, a larger question emerged. If Nathan Brooks had once stood at the top of the industry, why had he vanished completely? And why was a man with that kind of mind pushing a cleaning cart through their hallways instead of running a company of his own? The discoveries kept coming long after the excitement should have faded. Conference room 7 no longer felt like the center of a product launch. It felt like an investigation. Every few minutes, another employee uncovered a forgotten interview, an archived industry article, or a patent bearing Nathan Brooks's name. The evidence painted a picture that grew more unbelievable with each passing minute. Victoria stood near the glass wall overlooking the city skyline. Her reflection stared back at her while voices filled the room behind her. 7 major patents. 3 International Innovation Awards. A keynote speaker at the National Design Summit. Consulted by Fortune 500 companies. The numbers sounded impossible. Yet every record confirmed the same thing. Nathan Brooks had once been one of the most respected minds in American industrial design. Victoria slowly turned back toward the room. There has to be more to the story. Harold Bennett nodded. There is. He clicked on another archived article. The publication date was 12 years old. A photograph appeared showing Nathan standing beside a younger design team. He looked confident, successful, completely different from the quiet man who emptied trash cans and polished floors before sunrise. Harold adjusted his glasses. This was the last major article about him. Victoria stepped closer. What happened after that? Harold scrolled further. The room waited. There were no new articles, no interviews, no conference appearances, no company announcements. It was as if Nathan Brooks had simply vanished. That makes no sense, one project manager said. People do not disappear at the height of a career like that. Harold remained thoughtful. Most people do not. A silence settled over the room. Outside the conference room, employees moved through hallways carrying laptops and coffee cups. Inside, nobody seemed interested in work anymore. The mystery had become more important than the project itself. Then a young analyst spoke from the far end of the table. "I found something." Every head turned. He hesitated before continuing. "It is not from a business publication." He rotated his monitor toward the group. The screen displayed a local newspaper from a small Ohio town. The headline was simple: "Community mourns beloved teacher following sudden illness." Beneath the article was a photograph of a smiling woman standing beside a man everyone immediately recognized. Nathan. The room became still. Victoria stepped closer to read. The article described the woman as Emily Brooks, a middle school teacher known for her kindness and volunteer work. It mentioned a husband, a daughter, a family devastated by loss. Victoria felt a strange heaviness in her chest. Harold lowered his eyes. "Emily," he said quietly, "I remember hearing about this." Nobody spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above them. The city beyond the windows seemed distant now. The article was brief, but the timeline explained everything. Emily passed away shortly after Nathan's final major public appearance. Every achievement, every award, every opportunity had disappeared from the records soon afterward. Victoria stared at the photograph. Nathan's smile looked genuine there. Peaceful, hopeful, nothing like the guarded expression he carried today. "He left the industry," she whispered. Harold nodded. "Looks that way. For his family. Most likely." Victoria remembered the calm dignity with which Nathan had accepted being fired. No anger, no bitterness, no attempt to defend himself. A man who had once stood at the top of an entire profession had simply picked up his cart and walked away. The realization was difficult to ignore. One engineer shook his head slowly. "He could have told us who he was." Harold gave a faint smile. "A person who needs everyone to know who he was would never have become who he was." The words lingered in the room. Victoria looked toward the empty doorway once more. For the first time since becoming chief executive officer, she questioned her own judgment. She had seen a janitor. She had seen a maintenance uniform. She had seen an employee stepping beyond his role. What she had failed to see was the person. Then another notification appeared on a nearby screen. The updated simulation results had finished processing. The revised design not only solved the flaw, it increased efficiency by nearly 18%. The room erupted with stunned disbelief. Nobody laughed now. Nobody questioned the correction. The impossible project that had consumed months of effort had been fixed in less than 2 minutes. And the only person who truly understood how had just walked out of the building forever. Nathan Brooks did not know that an entire conference room was still talking about him. By late afternoon, he was driving home along a quiet suburban road lined with maple trees beginning to turn gold beneath the autumn sun. His old pickup truck rattled slightly every time it crossed a patch of uneven pavement, but he hardly noticed. His thoughts were focused on something far more important than lost jobs or corporate mistakes. At exactly 3:30 in the afternoon, he pulled into the parking lot of Willow Creek Middle School. Students poured through the front entrance carrying backpacks and laughing with friends. Nathan stepped out of the truck and waited near the sidewalk. A few moments later, a girl with long blonde hair spotted him immediately. Her face brightened. "Dad." Sophie Brooks hurried toward him with a stack of books pressed against her chest. Nathan smiled. The tension of the day seemed to disappear from his face. "How was school?" he asked. "I got an A on my science project." "I never doubted it." Sophie grinned. "You always say that." "Because it is always true." They climbed into the truck and drove home together. The small house sat on a quiet street where children still rode bicycles and neighbors waved from front porches. It was not a large home. The paint needed touching up in places. The fence leaned slightly near the backyard gate. But it was warm. It was peaceful. And it was theirs. Inside, Sophie spread homework across the kitchen table while Nathan prepared dinner. The smell of tomato soup slowly filled the room. Sunlight streamed through the window above the sink. For a brief moment, life felt wonderfully ordinary. Then Sophie noticed something. "Dad." Nathan looked up. "What is it?" "You got home early." He hesitated. Only for a second. Work ended sooner than expected. Sophie studied him carefully. She had inherited her mother's ability to notice things people tried to hide. Something happened. Nathan smiled gently. "You are too smart for your own good." Sophie lowered her pencil. "Did they fire you?" The question hung quietly in the air. Nathan set down the spoon he was using to stir the soup. Yes. Sophie looked disappointed, but not shocked. Because of the design? Nathan blinked. How did you know that? She pointed toward his shirt pocket. A folded piece of graph paper was sticking out slightly. Nathan laughed softly. You caught that too? Sophie nodded. You always carry sketches when you are thinking about engineering problems. Nathan pulled out the paper and placed it on the table. The rough calculations were still visible. Sophie examined them. You fixed their mistake, did you not? Nathan smiled again. I think so. Then why would they fire you? Nathan looked toward the fading sunlight outside the window. Sometimes people only see the job someone has. They do not see the person standing in front of them. Sophie considered that quietly. That sounds unfair. It probably is. Are you angry? Nathan shook his head. No, not even a little. Being angry rarely improves anything. Sophie stared at him for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Mom used to say that. Nathan felt his chest tighten gently. Emily's memory still lived in small moments like these. Not painful anymore. Just precious. Across town, Victoria Hayes sat alone in her office, staring at the same photograph of Nathan Brooks she had examined all afternoon. The city lights were beginning to appear beyond her windows. Her desk remained covered with printed articles and patent records. Yet one question refused to leave her mind. Why would a man capable of changing an entire industry choose a life no one noticed? Then her phone buzzed. A message from the board of directors appeared on the screen. The company's largest client had requested an emergency meeting for the following morning. If answers were not provided immediately, the contract could be withdrawn. Victoria read the message twice. A chill moved through her. For the first time, she understood the full weight of what had happened. The company did not merely need the design correction. They needed the man who created it. The emergency meeting began at 8 o'clock the next morning, and the atmosphere inside Hayes Dynamics felt nothing like the confident corporate environment Victoria Hayes had built over the years. The executives gathered around the polished conference table wore strained expressions. Coffee cups sat untouched. Laptops remained open, displaying financial projections that seemed to worsen by the hour. The company's largest client had reviewed the updated design overnight. Instead of celebrating the breakthrough, they wanted answers. How had a flaw that serious survived months of development? Why had it been corrected by someone outside the design team? And most importantly, who exactly was Nathan Brooks? Victoria listened as questions filled the room. Each one felt heavier than the last. Across the table, the chief financial officer adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. If this contract disappears, we are looking at losses that could reach tens of millions of dollars. Nobody responded. Everyone already knew. Another executive leaned forward. The client specifically requested to speak with the person who solved the problem. A silence followed. Victoria stared at the city skyline beyond the windows. The answer sounded painfully simple now. They needed Nathan. Yet Nathan no longer worked there. Harold Bennett sat quietly near the end of the table. Finally he spoke. This is not really about the contract. Several people looked toward him. Harold folded his hands. The larger issue is trust. We spent months trying to solve a problem. Nathan fixed it in minutes. The client knows that. They are wondering whether we even understand our own product. Nobody argued. Because nobody could. The truth had become impossible to avoid. Victoria felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had spent years building a reputation for decisive leadership. Quick decisions. Strong decisions. Confident decisions. But confidence and correctness were not always the same thing. Her phone vibrated softly. A message from the board chairman appeared. We need a solution today. Not next week. Today. Victoria read the words twice. Then she placed the phone face down on the table. Find everything you can about Nathan Brooks, she said. I want a complete picture. The room immediately went to work. Within an hour, more information surfaced. Not business awards. Not patents. Personal details. Human details. A former neighbor described Nathan as the father who never missed a school event. A former colleague remembered him leaving important meetings because his daughter needed him. A community volunteer coordinator spoke about the countless hours Nathan spent helping local students learn science and engineering. The stories shared a common theme. He had never chased recognition. He had chosen people over prestige every single time. Victoria sat quietly as she listened. The image of the janitor she had fired continued to disappear. In its place emerged someone far more impressive than the famous designer from old magazine articles. He was a man who had sacrificed everything without demanding credit for it. Around noon, another discovery arrived. An employee found a recent photograph from a local school science fair. Nathan stood beside Sophie, smiling proudly as she displayed a small engineering project she had built herself. Their happiness seemed effortless, genuine. Victoria stared at the picture longer than she intended. Then something unexpected happened. For the first time since this entire situation began, she stopped thinking about contracts, investors, and corporate consequences. She thought about Nathan. She thought about a father who had quietly rebuilt his life after loss. A man who showed up every day, cleaned hallways nobody noticed, and still found time to help strangers solve impossible problems. The realization settled over her slowly. She had not merely fired a brilliant designer. She had dismissed a good man without taking a single moment to understand who he was. And as the afternoon sun stretched across the conference room floor, Victoria finally reached a conclusion she could no longer avoid. If there was any chance of saving the company, the project, or her own integrity, she would have to find Nathan Brooks herself. Nathan was repairing a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen when he heard a car pull into the driveway. The sound was unfamiliar. Most visitors arrived in pickup trucks or family sedans. This vehicle carried the quiet hum of luxury engineering. Sophie glanced through the window first. "Dad," she said softly, "I think someone is here to see you." Nathan set down the screwdriver and walked toward the front door. Through the glass, he saw a woman standing beside a black executive sedan. The autumn breeze moved a few strands of blonde hair across her face. Even from a distance, he recognized her immediately. Victoria Hayes. For a brief moment, neither moved. Then Nathan opened the door. "Good afternoon." Victoria seemed less certain of herself than he remembered. The confidence that commanded boardrooms and corporate negotiations was still there, but it now shared space with something else. Humility. "Hello, Nathan." A silence followed. The neighborhood was quiet. Wind rustled through the trees lining the street. Somewhere in the distance, a lawn mower hummed softly. Victoria looked toward the modest house behind him, then toward the small flower garden near the porch. Nothing about this place reflected the image of a famous designer or celebrated innovator. It reflected something far rarer. "Peace. May I have a few minutes of your time?" she asked. Nathan studied her expression. Of course. He invited her onto the porch. Sophie remained inside, watching discreetly through the living room window. Victoria sat carefully in a wooden chair beside the front door. Nathan sat across from her. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Victoria took a breath. "I came to apologize." Nathan listened quietly. "What I did was wrong," she continued. "I judged you without knowing anything about you. I saw a job title instead of a person. I saw a janitor instead of a man with experience, wisdom, and talent." Nathan looked out toward the street. His expression remained calm. "Most people do." Victoria lowered her eyes. "That does not excuse it." Another silence settled between them. The golden afternoon sunlight stretched across the porch floorboards. Leaves drifted slowly through the air. For the first time in years, Victoria felt completely removed from the world of deadlines and quarterly reports. "The company needs your help," she admitted. "But that is not the only reason I am here." Nathan said nothing. "I spent the last 2 days learning who you are." Her voice softened. "The awards, the patents, your career, your family." Nathan's expression changed slightly at the mention of family. "I learned about Emily." The silence deepened. Victoria immediately regretted bringing up a painful memory, but Nathan surprised her. He smiled gently, not with sadness, with gratitude. "She was the best part of my life." Victoria nodded. "I can tell." For several moments they simply sat there. Then Nathan asked the question she knew was coming. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Victoria met his gaze directly. "Come back." The answer arrived quickly. Too quickly. "No," Victoria blinked. "No." Nathan shook his head. "I do not mean that disrespectfully, but I left that world behind a long time ago." "Because of your daughter?" "Because of my priorities." Victoria looked toward the house, where Sophie was quietly finishing homework at the kitchen table. "You gave up everything for her." Nathan smiled. "No," Victoria frowned slightly. "No. I gained everything because of her." The words landed with unexpected force. Victoria suddenly understood why every article, every neighbor, Every former colleague spoke about Nathan with such admiration. His character mattered more than his accomplishments. His values mattered more than recognition. She leaned forward slightly. Nathan, if you do not return, hundreds of employees could lose their jobs if this contract falls apart. Nathan remained silent. Many of them had nothing to do with what happened. The breeze moved gently between them. Nathan stared toward the horizon. Victoria could almost see the internal struggle behind his calm expression. He was not thinking about money. He was not thinking about status. He was thinking about responsibility. Finally, he looked back at her. I need time to think. Victoria nodded immediately. It was not the answer she wanted, but it was more than she expected. As she stood to leave, Sophie quietly opened the front door. Victoria turned toward her. The young girl smiled politely. My dad always helps people, Sophie said, even when they do not deserve it. Victoria felt her throat tighten. Nathan gave his daughter a gentle look. Sophie simply smiled and stepped back inside. Victoria walked toward her car carrying those words with her. And for the first time since this entire ordeal began, she realized the outcome no longer depended on contracts, investors, or corporate strategy. It depended entirely on the character of one quiet father who had every reason to walk away, and yet was still considering whether helping others mattered more than the hurt he had experienced. That evening, Nathan sat alone on the back porch long after the sun disappeared beyond the trees. The neighborhood had grown quiet. Porch lights glowed softly across the street. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime moved gently in the cool autumn air. Inside the house, Sophie was finishing homework, occasionally glancing through the kitchen window toward her father. She knew that look. It was the look he wore whenever he faced an important decision. Nathan held a worn photograph in his hands. Emily smiled back at him from another season of life. Another chapter. Another dream. He remembered the years when conference rooms had been his second home and innovation awards filled shelves he no longer owned. Back then, success seemed important. Then life had taught him a different lesson. People mattered more. Family mattered more. Character mattered most of all. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Sophie stepped onto the porch carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She handed one to her father and sat beside him. Neither spoke immediately. They simply watched the stars begin to appear above the rooftops. Finally, Sophie smiled. You are going back, are you not? Nathan chuckled quietly. What makes you so sure? Because you always help people. Nathan looked down at his mug. Sometimes helping people is complicated. Sophie shrugged. Not for you. Her answer was simple, honest, and impossible to ignore. The next morning, Victoria arrived at headquarters before sunrise. The building felt unusually tense. Employees whispered in hallways. Executives gathered in small groups. The emergency client meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Nobody knew what would happen. At 9:30, the board of directors assembled in the executive conference room. Financial reports covered the table. Forecasts projected severe losses if the contract disappeared. Every minute seemed to increase the pressure. Victoria stood near the window reviewing presentation notes she no longer believed would matter. Then the receptionist called. Miss Hayes. Victoria immediately picked up the line. Yes. There is someone here asking to see you. Her heart skipped slightly. Who? The answer came with unexpected simplicity. Nathan Brooks. For a moment, Victoria said nothing. Then she smiled for the first time in days. 10 minutes later, the entire executive floor watched as Nathan stepped from the elevator. He wore a clean button-down shirt and dark jeans. No expensive suit. No symbols of status. Just quiet confidence. Conversations stopped. Employees stood. Some lowered their eyes, embarrassed by how they had treated him. Others simply stared. The atmosphere felt completely different from the day he had left carrying a cleaning cart. Harold Bennett approached first. The veteran engineer extended his hand. Good to see you again. Nathan smiled warmly. Good to see you too, Harold. The older man laughed softly. You remembered my name after all these years. Good people are worth remembering. Harold looked away briefly, clearly moved by the comment. Victoria walked forward next. The hallway became completely silent. Hundreds of eyes seemed focused on the moment. Thank you for coming, she said. Nathan nodded. I am not here because of the company. Victoria listened carefully. I know. I am not here because of the board. I know. And I am certainly not here because of pride. A faint smile appeared on Victoria's face. I know that too. Nathan glanced around the building. Employees watched from offices, conference rooms, and workstations. Many looked frightened about their future. I am here because a lot of good people should not suffer because of one mistake. Silence followed. Respectful silence. The kind that cannot be demanded or purchased. Victoria felt a lump form in her throat. In all her years of leadership, nobody had taught her a lesson more powerful than the man standing before her now. Nathan had every reason to walk away. Instead, he chose grace. He chose responsibility. He chose dignity. And as the news spread through the building that Nathan Brooks had returned, something remarkable happened. Employees slowly began standing from their desks, one by one, then row by row. Applause filled the hallway. Not loud, not dramatic, just sincere. A spontaneous expression of gratitude from people who finally understood who had been walking among them all along. The client meeting began precisely at 10 o'clock. Executives from both companies filled the conference room, while additional participants joined through large video screens mounted along the walls. The atmosphere was serious. Months of work, millions of dollars, and hundreds of jobs seemed balanced on a single decision. Victoria sat at the head of the table, but this time she was not the center of attention. Nathan occupied a simple chair several seats away. He had requested nothing special. No executive title, no reserved position, no recognition, just a place to contribute. The lead client representative opened the discussion immediately. "We have one question," he said. "How was the flaw discovered?" The room grew quiet. Victoria looked toward Nathan. He answered calmly, by slowing down long enough to see what everyone else was rushing past. Several people exchanged curious glances. Nathan stood and walked toward the display screen. For the next 30 minutes, he explained the problem in language so clear that even non-engineers understood it. He did not criticize anyone. He did not embarrass the design team. He did not mention being fired. Instead, he spoke about collaboration, perspective, and the importance of questioning assumptions. The room listened carefully. By the end of the presentation, skepticism had vanished. Confidence returned. The client representatives requested a brief private discussion. Everyone waited. 5 minutes felt like an hour. Finally, the lead representative returned to the screen. A smile appeared on his face. "We are moving forward." Relief swept through the room like a wave. Several executives lowered their heads in gratitude. Others quietly applauded. The contract was safe. The project would continue. Hundreds of employees would keep their jobs. Yet the most remarkable moment arrived later that afternoon. Victoria gathered the entire company inside the main atrium. Employees filled every level of the building. Designers, engineers, administrators, receptionists, maintenance workers. The same people who once walked past Nathan without noticing him now waited in complete silence. Victoria stepped onto the small stage. The microphone trembled slightly in her hand. Not because she feared public speaking, because honesty required courage. She looked across the crowd. Then she spoke. "A few days ago, I made a mistake." The room remained silent. "I judged someone based on a title instead of character. I assumed I knew a person's value because of the position he held. I was wrong." No one moved. No one interrupted. Nathan Brooks saved this project. More importantly, he reminded all of us what leadership actually means. She turned toward him. Leadership is not authority. It is responsibility. It is humility. It is respect. Nathan stood quietly near the back of the crowd, looking as uncomfortable with attention as ever. Victoria smiled gently. "Nathan, on behalf of everyone at Hayes Dynamics, I am sorry." For several seconds, there was only silence. Then Nathan nodded once. Not dramatically, not triumphantly, simply graciously. The crowd began applauding, this time louder than before. The sound filled the atrium from floor to ceiling. Yet what happened next surprised everyone even more. Victoria offered Nathan an executive leadership position, a salary larger than most people in the building had ever earned, and complete authority over the innovation division. Nathan listened carefully. Then he smiled. "I appreciate the offer." A hopeful expression appeared on many faces. "But I would rather serve as an advisor." The room looked confused. Nathan continued. "I spent years chasing achievements. Then life taught me what matters most. I want time for my daughter. I want balance. I want purpose." The applause returned, stronger than ever. Late that evening, Nathan arrived home as the sun dipped below the horizon. Sophie waited on the front porch. "How did it go?" she asked. Nathan sat beside her on the wooden steps. "The project is safe." Sophie smiled. and the company finally knows who you are. Nathan looked toward the fading sky. Warm light painted the neighborhood in gold and amber. He thought about Emily, about sacrifice, about second chances, about the strange journey that had brought him here. Then he smiled. No, he said softly. Today they learned who they could become. Sophie leaned against